What happened to the internet? If you were on the internet pre-2008, it was a very different place. And yes, I know I was only 13 at the time, but the reason both my sister and I ended up being web content creators, I reckon, is because we were the original internet addicts. The internet pretty much went live the year we were born. And on top of this, our father worked with computers, so we grew up alongside every new tech discovery, trying it, mastering it, and eventually creating with them as well. It started with a game I remember playing. It was made the year I was born, Descent. I'd play with a joystick on this giant hunking computer in a tiny little closet room as a toddler against my sister and dad, and it gave me the worst nightmares. So they switched me to Captain Bible, which also gave me nightmares. Next, we moved on to Neopets, where we learned all the joys of capitalism and gambling. Then RuneScape, where we discovered murder, loss, and poverty. On to Gaia Online, honing our creative writing skills and discovering where the 72 genders and being trans wolf began. It's been around a lot longer than you think. And it just snowballed from there. Gaming on Newgrounds and Miniclip, downloading 10,000 browser extensions to get a Firesword mouse clicker, and viruses on LimeWire, making MySpace profiles and SoundCloud beats with Juicy Fruit Studios, 4chan trolling, Tumblr accounts, and eventually YouTube. Oh, YouTube. Rewind 10 to 15 years, and it was a place of utter, unhinged chaos. This was one of the most popular videos at the time.
Cheers. Cheers.
Literally all of your favorite progressive YouTubers were doing blackface 24/7.
This is a story all about how my life got twisted upside down.
It's Nicki Minaj. I think I'm a difficult person to date because there's so many of me.
Meanwhile, my sister was uploading gay fanfic videos of entirely heterosexual Star Trek characters, while I was... there's no explaining this.
I don't even know where to start with you. I mean, do you even know who you're talking to?
The only way I could describe the internet at the time was like the Wild West. But more than just the craziness, it was also that land of opportunity. If you remember the movie Far and Away, where Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman just immigrated to the US and everyone is racing to put down a stake for land, it was like that. It was like the last truly new undiscovered land, where you didn't need to be anybody. You didn't need to own anything. You didn't need to be famous or rich. But if you got on that boat and took a chance, put yourself out there, you could own a slice of the world online. But seemingly, in the blink of an eye, all that has changed. And it was all sanitized. Chaotic creativity was replaced with corporate stability. Like a gentrified neighborhood slowly getting bought up by one giant firm and cleansed, the city of the internet was sterilized, and with it, its soul too. But before we get into this long and sordid tale of how the net went the way of the Wild West, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, Truly, for making content like mine still possible despite all of this massive suppression. Our friends, Noble Gold. You may have heard the word tapering in the news lately. It's the new fancy Fed buzzword, and you'll hear all sorts of definitions for it. But plain and simple, what it actually means is that Washington has to repay around $30 trillion it has borrowed. And can you guess where that's gonna come from? Yep, your pockets. Janet Yellen said we would never see another financial crisis in our lifetimes when she ran for the Fed, but now, 4 years later, she is warning of a catastrophe. And here we are. Whatever happens next, though, our friends at Noble Gold can keep your finances safe. By starting a precious metals IRA or 401k, you can fight the coming wave of inflation and ride out the storm with your savings intact. And as a bonus and a thank you, you will get a free 5-ounce solid silver America the Beautiful bullion coin with each qualifying plan you start this month. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com or call them at 877-646-5347. That's 877-646-5347. All right, now back to what the hell happened to the internet. If you go to YouTube today and look on the front page, it is hardly distinguishable from a television menu. I see BBC, Marvel Entertainment, Hell's Kitchen, ABC, Got Talent, Universal Pictures, TLC, GQ, UFC. You know what I don't see? Pretty much anyone who isn't a verified millionaire or nameless faceless corporation. Maybe there will be a breakthrough video every once in a while, a trend of some vlogger doing a feel-good thing like playing the piano in front of a crowd, but that's about it. It gets worse if you look up anything related to popular news as well. You could scroll all day and you won't see a single non-verified, non-mainstream source for anything regarding COVID. I'll be real, even alternative left-wing channels won't come up if they aren't corporate backed. So how did we get here? From the Wild West that it used to be? Well, basically the same way the actual Wild West stopped existing. A bunch of busybody bureaucrats and coasters got tired of people living in a way they didn't like. There's a famous thesis by Frederick Jackson Turner on the significance of the frontier in American history, in which he documents the rise and fall of the Wild West, how men would make their way west to find freedom and new lands untouched, sick and tired of the big cities and their constriction. And in these new lands, they would find new complex problems to tackle, whether it be the elements of the Rocky Mountains or Mississippi Valley, dangers of indigenous tribes, or simply the vast, unrepenting wilderness that not every man is made for. While Turner analyzes the stages of the frontier, he makes a fascinating admission that one of the most important aspects of its existence was the individualism it created and the democracy it cemented in America. And I quote, "Complex society is precipitated by the wilderness into a kind of primitive organization based on the family. The tendency is antisocial. It produces antipathy to control, and particularly to any direct control. The tax gatherer is viewed as a representative of oppression." And yeah, that's exactly what the Wild West was, an escape from the tax gatherers, where men would take violence, uncertainty, and chaos over spending one more minute around suited, snooty Harvard grads.
Well, and what do we owe this visit from the cattle baron?
I've got a touch of hangover, bureaucrat. Don't push me.
And the busybodies could not stand this, that these men could own land and dictate to themselves how to live. Not only could they not stand it, but it became a genuine threat, as Turner acknowledged. So long as free land exists, the opportunity for a competency exists, and economic power secures political power. But the democracy born of free land, strong in selfishness and individualism, intolerant of administrative experience and education, and pressing individual liberty beyond its proper bounds, has its dangers as well as its benefits. And that was it. The moment of realization that the common folk had garnered far too much power, wealth, and self-determination that this sort of boundless freedom offered. Common folk without the proper administrations and education to tell them what to do with all that freedom. The East has always feared the result of an unregulated advance on the frontier and has tried to check and guide it. And eventually they did. As cowboy communes turned into towns and then to cities, eventually the bureaucrats from the East with their books, accounts, rules, and laws all showed up too, and they sure as hell made it over before the advance could become too established in its freedoms. You'll notice the West Coast is almost entirely bought up federal land, purchased by the US government towards the end of the frontier, and through many ways, they stopped short what could have been one of the greatest threats to power on the East Coast. And funny enough, Middle America is still that today, but far more tamed than it could have been. And this is precisely what happened to the internet. A great taming spurred on by the fear that the common man had his own world, where he could have power, property, and influence unregulated by those more educated than he. Although this advance was not quelled, controlled, and tamed by the Atlantic elite, instead we've got a different species of social organizer, the West Coast elite. Still from Harvard, but often the dropouts, more laid back, less suits, but plenty of vision for how the common man should live. And you know what? I'll be honest here. The big bad Silicon Valley tech giants weren't always the way we view them now. Like the East Coasters, they're still left-wing at heart, but they weren't the bureaucrats. They were the weirdos, the freaks, the nerds, and the artists who saw the idea of internet cowboys as an almost revolutionary social movement instead of stuffy and old like organized Democrats.
We are one people, with one will, one
They reveled in the free frontier they had created, and they stoked the flames of it. A free internet was an internet that could be stopped by no one, especially not corporate hacks and Republican busybodies.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Oh, right. Almost forgot to mention that. This Silicon Valley love of freedom at the time was predicated on the fact that the West Coast creatives felt internet cowboys would always vote Democrat. Why would a free internet-loving individual ever vote Democrat, you may ask? Well, if you're my age or younger, you probably don't remember this well, but the Democrats and Republicans were very different parties during the boom of the internet. Democrats were the Occupy Wall Street, free speech club, the party of video games, weed, and spitting at corporate warmongers. Meanwhile, the Republicans, Bush-era, pro-war, polished corporatist evangelicals who ran on party lines of banning violent video games and porn. And God forbid a free internet ever exist in a world like that.
The Republicans are having their convention and they're releasing their platform. From the platform, current law on all forms of pornography and obscenity need to be vigorously enforced. All forms of pornography and obscenity.
Mr. Buckley actually believes I think he believes we ought to legalize marijuana. I don't. I think that'd be a big mistake.
That Harry Potter has initiated such response to witchcraft that witches now have schools of witchcraft on the internet where children can come, be graduated into, get certificates of graduation to become witches.
The free internet was supposed to be the front line of the new Young Democrats. Barack Obama actually made US election history by being the first candidate to place campaign ads in a video game. 18 games to be exact over Xbox Live. Hell, you would never believe this today, but the New York Times back in 2010 were even publishing positive articles about 4chan, doing neutral interviews with its founder, Moot. 2010 CNN even bolstered research stating the web was a net plus for liberals because conservatives were so anti-free speech. Liberals, the research finds, are oriented toward community activism, employing technology to encourage debate and feature user-generated content. Conservatives, on the other hand, are more comfortable with a commanding leadership and use restrictive policies to combat disorderly speech in online forums. All of this suggests that the internet may benefit liberals more often than conservatives, at least for now. Looking back, that "at least for now" really carried the article, because you will notice both these pieces were published back in 2010, and not long after that, another like it would never be published again. The following years would set the stage to change not only the Republican Party and American politics forever, but the internet with them. Enter Gamergate and Donald Trump.
I am officially running for President of the United States.
This is costing people's lives.
The topic of discussion today is Gamergate.
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 Gamergate was the harbinger of kind of the culture wars we're seeing every single day.
There is no way I am going to do a massive deep dive into Gamergate again. But for those of you who need the TLDR, Gamergate was a massive controversy in the journalism and games industry involving collusion, scandals, and the like, but mostly a lot of journalists and some game creators getting upset about alleged sexism in the industry and demanding everyone care about it as much as they did. The result of this was the free speech-loving internet gamers, many of whom were Democrats at the time, who loved the internet for its big titty anime characters, crazy debates, unhinged comedy, and being everything they thought the repressive Republicans were not, went into all-out war with the left-wing creative elites in Silicon Valley and their journalists, who were under the impression that these internet users would use their liberal freedoms to help them socially reorganize the world into a feminist far-left utopia, I guess.
We have to take our power back, and we have to get our voices back. And together, we have to create an internet where no one is left behind because of who or where they are. Remember, you are all the internet, and if you choose to be, you can be the feminist internet too. Thank you.
As it turns out, most people won't live in a progressive commune voluntarily, and thus these Silicon Valley elites had to go with the dictatorship approach instead, a model which far outpaced the conservative censors Democrat voters had hated for so long. And so, the prediction that the right would push away internet users with their hierarchical and constricted forums ended up being a prediction which matched the left's behavior by tenfold, and their anger towards people's free choices to live in a way which did not match their vision for social organization began to mirror the East Coast's resentment of the Wild West almost exactly. How dare these people think they can speak like this? How dare they think they can act like this? How dare they get spaces to live beyond our control and social systems? And worst of all, how dare they like their slutty video game characters? And war was waged against 4chan, against YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, any site that harbored those who wanted to speak against feminist reorganizing of the gaming and journalism spaces. And all that did was push people further right. And in this, the right saw an opportunity. Or perhaps it was just by chance. But in comes Donald Trump, who not only entered the scene as many Democrats were beginning to tire of their own side, but completely transformed the Republican Party from the old stuffy warmongers in suits to a lifelike, anti-bureaucrat, hysterical, trolling, American exceptionalism, free speech, and anti-corporatism party. It was everything that appealed to these young and frustrated cowboys who wanted nothing to do with those telling them how to live. And the internet made Trump their champion.
I think you heard me. You're having a hard time tonight. Go back to Univision. Go ahead. Only Rosie O'Donnell.
You can't stop the Trump.
We called it meme magic in the Great Meme Wars. Trump was going viral on every platform. People were making video compilations, organizing pages, rallies, gaming groups, trolling armies, and obliterating any perception that the internet belonged to the left. It became the right's war machine. Comment section blitzkrieg. And it worked. Despite every single establishment source claiming Trump was going to bring unprecedented evil to the White House, the man still won.
Yep, that's us. You're probably wondering how we ended up in this situation. How did he do it? How did Donald Trump win the presidential election?
It made no sense. It was never supposed to happen. People laughed at anyone who so much as suggested the idea on television.
And which Republican candidate has the best chance of winning the general election?
Of the declared ones right now, Donald Trump.
They certainly couldn't blame the usual candidates. The press were against him. Hillary spent almost twice as much on her campaign. It couldn't be the super PACs. What the hell was going on? The only explanation left was the unregulated internet. The fact that the common man was able to organize and influence as he wished, rather than have his views dictated to him by New York or Silicon Valley. And with this realization came the realization that the Democratic Party was dead, so long as an open internet existed. And that what happened with Trump could never be allowed again. We could reread Turner's Frontier essay as saying, So long as free internet exists, the opportunity for a competency of the regular people exists. Economic power through crypto and new revenue streams, the platforms which give a voice to figures, secures political power. But the democracy born of free internet, strong in selfishness and individualism, intolerant of administrative experience and education, presses individual liberty beyond its proper bounds and has its dangers. Dangers we are not willing to accept. And so the sanitization process began, and once more it paralleled the frontier. One of the tragic results of the Wild West moving from a relatively isolated, substance-driven society to a more civilized one with actual towns and cities was that justice in the frontier didn't scale to larger communities, and obviously no one wanted the phony East Coast idea of justice around, so instead they resorted to a form of justice that did scale, but also didn't work for very obvious reasons. That is, lynch mobs. Yes, justice that the Wild West settler towns employed when they began to sanitize was quite literally lynching. Or as the politically correct term for it goes, holding people accountable. That's not just a joke. It's one of the most tragic ironies of our day that the left, despite being supposedly obsessed with America's racist sins, is now endorsing modern-day lynchings, i.e. cancel culture, to enforce their power. But hey, the Democrats did it during the Wild West days too, so maybe they're just doing what they know. The difference is, though, in today's internet Wild West, the lynch mobs are not just an unfortunate side effect of society evolving. They are literally deliberate creations of the media to push out their competition. In this case, by demanding that because one creator on a site, like YouTube, behaved badly and got cancelled, the entire site must be rigged against small creators to ensure no filthy, unwoke, ordinary people ever get money from our enlightened corporate overlords. And no, this is not just about appeasing advertisers, because this was never how things worked in the past. In the past, large sites like YouTube, with punishingly large market shares, used to just give the middle finger to advertisers and say, if you want to censor what's on my site, or if you aren't comfortable with it, then you don't get to advertise here. It didn't change until the media and lobbyist groups were sent into all-out warfare against YouTube, Facebook, and other large platforms, deliberately pressuring companies to demand censorship, which they never asked for before. Why? Because not only was the internet a threat to Democrats now, after the win of Trump, they were a threat to the established media, who used to be the only ones with access to your living room, the only ones able to broadcast a story, now having to compete against every brilliant mind across the planet with a webcam and a cell phone. It was doomed to destroy them. So they had to destroy it first. And sure, someone like me can make a video here, but as of 3 years ago, it's never going to appear on the trending page. It will never be shown to people who don't follow me already. I can see the back end of my channel and exactly why the views have changed. The majority of my views used to come from suggested videos before. Now, almost zero do. Because they're no longer suggested. They're barely shown to those who actively follow me. So there's an illusion that you can reach the world, and you're just not as successful as these big mainstream primetime creators. And they have to keep that illusion up so people don't realize they've created a new class system on the internet. Pandora's box is already open. People know they can do everything the big media can do. They can sing their songs, write their books, report on their news, and do it 1,000 different ways that are better and more creative than them. This had never been the case throughout history. 1,000 years ago, if you wanted to be rich and famous, there was a perception of impossibility around that. The rich and the famous were kings and queens, royalty, some even having godlike status. They only spoke to you through men who read scrolls that dictated truth down. Even 50 years ago, Hollywood was this magical world. The people you saw there were images of perfection, only projecting a view they wanted you to see, the golden age. The scandals existed, but they were few and far between compared to now, where every star is on the front page of People magazine with a sex tape or a botched butt lift. The exclusivity has been lost. The mystery of the elite is gone, and their barricades dropped to the hordes of peasants who used to only look on from afar. And the sanitization of the internet is their final effort to reverse that mistake they made by equalizing influence. They allowed far too much freedom. They let the normal people get far too close to their throne, to the point that they almost took it forever. So they're buying up all the real estate online and gating things up. And even if you are allowed to exist, you can only do so in a fiefdom, essentially. You can get some views, but you give 50% of that revenue to your Twitch overlords. And don't even think about starting your own website. They won't show it on Google, won't be featured on Apple News, it won't be auto-downloaded to people's computers. In fact, they may just ban it from the App Store. So you sure as hell better use the sites that take rent and push mainstream sources on the top. Funny enough, while I call this the sanitization of the internet, as mentioned earlier, you could just as easily call it the establishment of classism online as well. Another frontier, one for the elites by the useful idiot leftists who helped the aristocrats garner all the means of internet production. And that is where the Wild West analogy goes from uncanny to outright sinister. For you see, the Wild West was also the center of arguably the most important battle in American history over who could and couldn't be free and compete on equal terms with others. I refer, of course, to slavery. In fact, it's arguable that battles over whether new Western states would be slave states or free states were a major cause of the Civil War. Well, you can once more file it under terrible irony that the people who openly claim to be the new generation of abolitionists are in fact the people arguing for a regime which treats some people as beneath representation because they watch the wrong commentators and play the wrong games. And indeed, beneath humanity itself because they haven't been civilized by Harvard and the HR departments. They're just deplorables, not people. But sometimes the deplorables stage a revolt, and the truth breaks through. You can see it in critic reviews. The selected critics at Rotten Tomatoes, who are supposed to dictate down to you what you should watch and like, are always completely detached from the actual people's wants, and that is on stark display. The likes and dislikes or comments on a Biden White House video may just show the discontent of the people, or the polls on a news story, the chance of "Let's go Brandon" in the crowd that the news reporter can't quite cover up from the cameras. These glitches in the matrix give us an eye into what's actually happening. But Silicon Valley are perfecting these glitches quickly. Soon the audience reviews will be curated or removed, the White House comment section censored, and the algorithms tweaked to tie all those loose ends. And as a result, we find ourselves in this rare and small window, just able to see what things used to be, these last few years of the beautiful, chaotic, magnificent Wild West we once had online here. And it's a shame that the left ever learned they couldn't exist while the open internet did, otherwise we may have held on to it a wee bit longer. But for those of us who do remember our time as Cowboys, it was a pleasure. And while it does seem to be over, one thing I do know is since the dawn of time, men have always found new frontiers. Even if there are none, they make them. And that ultimately is what will prove to be the left's undoing. Because while I laugh at the irony that they're acting like slavers and colonizers, the fact is that this group is not acting out of racism. This isn't a Dems are the real racist memes, though arguably they are acting out of bigotry. No. The real source of their acts is what has lain the root of tyranny since the dawn of time. As H.L. Mencken once wrote, all government, in its essence, is a conspiracy against the superior man. Its one permanent object is to oppress him and cripple him. If it be aristocratic in organization, then it seeks to protect the man who is superior only in law against the man who is superior in fact. If it be democratic, then it seeks to protect the man who is inferior in every way against both. Or to adjust part of that for today, if it be woke in organization, then it seeks to protect the man who is superior only in the terms of service against the man who is superior in views. But merit will win out. The truth will win out. I just hope it doesn't take a civil war to get there this time. So enjoy that little white pill. I rarely hand them out. I'll go read the comments section for a bit more black pill balance on my day. Seriously though, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I look forward to reading your thoughts on this. Be sure to share it as well, because YouTube sure as hell isn't going to show anyone this video. And thank you to my Subscribe Star members for making this possible as well. I will see you all next time.